Hey guys. Tonight we're going somewhere your modern brain might struggle to survive, straight into the sticky web of medieval marriage politics. Imagine living in a world where not getting married wasn't just your choice. It was basically an act of rebellion against God, family, and the entire social system. You think dodging dating apps is hard? Try dodging a feudal lord with a quill and a marriage contract. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your city and time. I love knowing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in the 12th century. Somewhere between a crumbling castle and a damp village lane. The air smells of hay, smoke, and anxiety, the scent of a society obsessed with control. Here, marriage isn't about love or romance, it's a transaction. A duty, a way to keep land, wealth, and women all neatly accounted for. And if you're a woman daring to say, no, you've just declared war on the system. Your parents have already decided your future. Maybe your father's whispering over a jug of ale with a neighboring farmer about dowries and oxen. Maybe your mother's stitching your wedding veil, humming like she's sealing a deal. You sit there quietly, knowing that your opinion, your life, is just a minor detail in this grand negotiation. Refusing a match means more than disappointment, it means disgrace. The family's honor cracks like old parchment under pressure. You see, in this world, honor isn't measured by your achievements or kindness. It's measured by your ability to comply. Refusing to marry means you're ungrateful, disobedient, and, worst of all, dangerous. Because an unmarried woman is unpredictable. She isn't owned, isn't controlled, isn't producing heirs or alliances. And in a society built on hierarchy, that kind of freedom is terrifying. It's funny, in a dark way, today, being single might earn you a few jokes at dinner parties. Back then, it could earn you a dungeon cell, or a lifetime locked behind abbey walls. Medieval chroniclers didn't even have a word for independent woman. They just called you trouble. And yet, there's something oddly familiar in their fear. People whispering, she's too proud, too difficult, too strange. The same tone you'd hear today when someone breaks the rules of expectation. You can almost hear the judgment echoing through time, softened by candlelight and cobblestone. You walk through the village square, past rows of thatched cottages and gossiping neighbors. Someone's daughter just got betrothed, the bells are ringing. People are smiling, bread's being shared. It's a festival of control disguised as joy. And you, standing on the edge, feel that subtle chill. You're not celebrating. You're resisting. A group of older women glance at you. Their faces tell stories without words. Some surrendered. Some adapted. Some quietly mourn what they never had a chance to choose. You see it in their eyes. The understanding that once you say, no, your world shrinks. You might lose invitations, friends, or protection. A refusal becomes a silent crime. By the 13th century, the Church had already turned marriage into a sacrament, not just a social contract, but a divine one. That meant refusing marriage wasn't just disobeying your father. It was disobeying God. And when men in robes and rings say it's God's will, the conversation ends quickly. Picture this. A priest preaching that unmarried women risk the fires of hell, and half the town nodding in agreement. It's not that they hated women. It's that they feared what couldn't be contained. An unmarried woman, especially one with wit, beauty, or money, was like an unsupervised candle, likely to set something ablaze. Of course, not all families were cruel. Some tried to reason with their daughters, promises of comfort, safety, maybe even affection, but in truth, it wasn't about happiness. It was about reputation. If you stayed unmarried too long, people whispered that something was wrong with you, physically, morally, or both. Perhaps she's cursed, they'd say, or God has hardened her heart. You might laugh now, but back then those words carried weight heavier than armor. A rumor could ruin you more efficiently than any sword. The law offered no protection. Women's worth was entangled with men's status, and the church reinforced it with scripture. Preachers quoted verses about obedience, modesty, and woman's natural role. And in case you were wondering, yes, scholars still debate whether that was about faith or pure social control. Spoiler: it's probably both. You imagine walking into a candlelit hall, where your father sits with a potential husband, a man twice your age, smelling faintly of wine and horses. They discuss you as if you're a piece of fine cloth, sturdy, decorative, and ideally obedient. The man asks if you can sew, if you can cook, if you know your place. You do, unfortunately. It's at the bottom of the decision tree. You could run, but where? Towns were small, and news traveled faster than pigeons. A runaway daughter would be hunted, shamed, or forced into repentance, so most stayed, trapped between obedience and survival. Still, some did say no, some whispered defiance behind closed doors. Some delayed marriages with excuses, poor harvests, illness, mysterious vows to God. You can almost see them, glancing at the horizon, wondering if freedom is worth the risk. A historian once wrote that medieval Europe wasn't designed for individuals, only for families, guilds, and faith, which makes the unmarried woman not just lonely, but conceptually illegal, a glitch in the social software. And you, dear listener, are that glitch. As night settles on the imaginary village in your mind, you can hear the faint rustle of wind through haystacks. Somewhere, a young woman is kneeling by a window, whispering a prayer not for a husband, but for peace. The courage to stay herself in a world that punishes that very act. You can almost hear her heartbeat, steady and brave beneath the hum of centuries. You wake up to a different kind of silence, the heavy, suffocating silence that follows a scandal. Last night, you refused the marriage arranged for you. This morning, the whole household feels colder. Your mother won't look at you. Your father's jaw is locked like stone. And the servants move quietly as if avoiding a ghost. Family honor in the Middle Ages was a delicate thing, fragile as spun glass. One wrong word, one rumor, and the entire household's reputation could crumble. And nothing shattered that illusion faster than a daughter who said no. Your refusal wasn't just a rejection of a man. It was an insult to your father's authority. A crack in the facade of obedience that society expected every woman to uphold. Families were not built on affection, they were built on alliances. Marriage was the glue that sealed property, wealth, and political favors together. So when you tore that paper contract in half, metaphorically or literally, you didn't just rebel. You detonated a bomb right under your family's pride. You can hear them whispering in the next room, your parents and the village priest. They think you can't hear them, but the walls in medieval homes were thinner than reputation itself. The priest suggests repentance. Your father mutters about shame. Your mother cries softly, as if your independence has cursed the bloodline. In towns like this, families went to absurd lengths to protect their honor. Some locked their daughters away, for their own good. Others hurried to arrange a second suitor before gossip spread too far. The worst, though, sent their daughters to convents, not because they were pious, but because the church offered the perfect cover story. She's chosen to serve God. They'd say, it sounded holy, it sounded respectable, it also sounded like a lie. But no one dared to question it. You'd think the church would object to being used as a family punishment system. But in truth, they didn't mind. More women in convents meant more hands to labor, more dowries donated to the abbey, and more souls saved from the sin of disobedience. Everyone won, except the women. You sit by a window, staring out at the muddy road. You can almost see your freedom there, winding into the distance like a thin line between courage and ruin. Somewhere beyond those hills are women who tried to escape. Some made it, most didn't. You remember your cousin, the one who refused her husband because he beat her. They said she'd been sent to a nunnery for peace of mind. The truth? She never returned. Some say she died of fever. Others whisper she was punished for her unruly nature. The details were lost, but the warning remained: don't follow her path. In a society obsessed with obedience, even silence becomes suspicious. You avoid the village square for days, but still hear the rumors creep in through the shutters. She's bewitched, someone says. She's cursed, says another. She's proud. Pride. That was the deadliest sin for a woman. Not murder, not theft, not lust. Pride. It was the idea that you might believe you own your own life. The irony, of course, is that medieval men were applauded for pride. Knights strutted with it, kings wore it like perfume. But in women, pride was rebellion. You weren't supposed to have it. Or opinions. Or, heaven forbid, choices. And yet, there were cracks in the order. Some families, desperate to save face, quietly negotiated loopholes. A woman might delay marriage by pretending to take a temporary vow of chastity. That usually bought her a year or two, unless her father needed an alliance sooner. Others feigned illness or claimed divine visions. Anything that might delay the inevitable walk down the aisle. Still, the pressure never stopped. Every visit from a relative, every sermon, every look at the dinner table reminded you. The world would not forgive a daughter who refused to play her part. You overhear your father one evening, speaking to a neighbor. Better she serve God than shame me, he says. You realize then that your fate has already been decided. The convent will come calling soon. But tonight, you're still free, barely. You slip out after dark, walking past sleeping houses and the faint smell of bread from a baker's oven. The moonlight spills like silver milk across the road, and for a moment, you imagine another life, one where your worth isn't measured by how well you obey. It's a fragile dream, but it's yours. You reach the edge of a small chapel and see candles flickering inside. A nun stands by the door, humming a hymn. Her face is calm, peaceful even. You wonder if she chose that peace or if it was chosen for her. The two look the same in the dark. Historians still debate how many women voluntarily entered convents versus how many were forced. Records blur piety and coercion together like ink running in the rain. Some women truly sought divine life, others were simply out of options. Either way, the system worked. The family's reputation stayed intact. The church gained another servant, and society carried on pretending everything was in perfect order. But tonight, as you walk back to your house, you feel something shift, a quiet rebellion inside your chest. You might not escape the fate they've planned, but you can refuse to let it define your soul. You lie down in bed, staring at the rafters above you. The wood creaks softly, as if whispering secrets from centuries past. Somewhere, in another village, another woman is making the same decision. Some will yield, some will fight, and their stories will fade, unnamed, but not forgotten. Your eyelids grow heavy again. The murmurs of shame fade into the hum of the night. Tomorrow, the priest will return. He'll speak of duty, sin, and salvation. But tonight, in the quiet space between fear and freedom, you breathe, and that, in this world, is its own act of defiance. The morning bells toll before sunrise. Their sound cold and metallic, echoing through the valley like a warning. You already know what they mean. Today, the priest is coming back. The decision's been made while you slept. No one asked your opinion because, in this world, consent is a luxury, and women like you aren't supposed to have luxuries. Your mother ties your hair back without meeting your eyes. Her hands tremble, not with anger, but with fear. She's seen this before, the quiet march of a daughter's fate toward the church. She murmurs something about how it's better this way, how God will forgive your stubbornness. You almost laugh, but the sound dies in your throat. Outside, the sky glows faintly pink over the fields. You step into the chill, your breath forming tiny ghosts in the air. The priest is waiting near the gate, holding a small book and a larger smile. It's not a punishment, he says, though the way his eyes flicker betrays him. It's salvation. You walk beside him in silence, following the narrow dirt path that leads toward the monastery. The village recedes behind you, roofs, smoke, and gossip shrinking into a distant blur. You think about what he said. Salvation. It's such a polite word for exile. By the Middle Ages, the church ruled not just souls, but hearts, families, and even bedchambers. Marriage was no longer just a social contract, it was a divine duty. Every refusal became a rebellion against heaven itself. To stay unmarried meant stepping outside the sacred structure, outside God's supposed plan. The priest talks as you walk, quoting scripture you already know. You don't interrupt him. You've learned that silence is safer than debate. The road curves past a crumbling stone cross, its edges worn smooth by centuries of rain and superstition. Beneath it lies the invisible line between your life and your captivity. You arrive at the abbey just as the sun spills across the horizon. It's beautiful in a cruel sort of way, towering arches, soft chanting in the distance, and the faint scent of beeswax candles. A place that claims to be peaceful, yet feels eerily final. Inside the gates, you meet the Mother Superior. She greets you with the precision of someone who has welcomed many reluctant brides of Christ. Her eyes study you, your posture, your silence, your defiance, and you can tell she's measuring how much work it will take to break you in. In the medieval church, vows were supposed to be voluntary. But voluntary was a flexible word. A woman could be persuaded, pressured, even physically forced to choose God. Families often presented their daughters with two doors, one leading to disgrace, the other to the convent. You didn't so much choose faith as stumble into it to avoid ruin. You're shown to a small cell, bare stone, one straw mattress, a single window no wider than your palm. There's a Bible on the table, though you know you're not meant to interpret it yourself. The walls hum faintly with the echo of prayers. For a moment, you wonder if those prayers ever reach beyond these walls, or if they simply bounce back, repeating forever. During the next days, you learn the rhythms of this new life. Dawn prayers, silent meals, endless chores. The nuns move like shadows, faces hidden under veils, eyes downcast. You mimic them because it's safer that way. But inside, you're still awake. Sometimes, in the chapel, you see women kneeling with true devotion, faces serene, hands steady. You envy them a little. Faith, when genuine, seems like armor, but you can't find it yet. Your mind is too full of what-ifs and half-remembered freedoms. The abbess assigns you to the scriptorium, a quiet room filled with the scratching of quills and the smell of parchment. You copy Latin verses, your hand aching, your eyes blurring. The words praise obedience and humility. You try not to notice the irony. At night, when everyone sleeps, you hear faint sobs drifting from nearby cells. Some are from newcomers like you, daughters sent here under the banner of faith. Others are from women who've been here decades, mourning lives they barely remember. Historians still debate how much agency these women truly had. Were they saints or prisoners? Scholars find records of both. Noblewomen who chose the veil for spiritual freedom, and commoners who were locked behind cloisters for defying their fathers. Reality, as always, lived somewhere between those lines. There's a moment, maybe 2 weeks in, when you start to forget the sound of laughter. The convent is orderly, clean, calm, but sterile. Joy is rationed here. You speak only when allowed. You eat only what's given. And you pray for the same salvation that trapped you. Still, the world outside leaks in through gossip. You overhear talk of a nobleman's daughter who ran away before her vows. They say she was caught near the river and dragged back by her hair. She needed correction. One nun whispers, for her soul's sake, you don't ask what that correction was. The church claimed to rule the heart, but in truth, it ruled through fear, fear of hell, of shame, of isolation. And yet, within these same walls, some women carved out spaces of quiet power. A few became skilled scribes, healers, or herbalists. Some even corresponded with bishops and kings. The abbey might have been a cage, but it was a cage with cracks. You find yourself thinking, maybe this isn't the end. Maybe it's a different kind of beginning, one that no one planned for you. One evening, as the candles burn low, you kneel in the chapel, surrounded by the scent of wax and lavender. The air feels thick, timeless. You whisper not a prayer, but a promise, to remember who you were before the walls. For the first time since arriving, You feel a small spark of peace. Not from submission, but from survival. You've been in the abbey long enough now to understand its rhythm, the slow heartbeat of bells, the measured breathing of chants, the endless cycle of prayer and silence. But outside these walls, a new kind of label is spreading across villages, towns, and even court records: spinster. It sounds harmless, almost cozy to a modern ear. Someone who spins thread. Right? But here in the 13th century, it's a word dripping with judgment. A linguistic trap, woven neatly into everyday talk. Originally, spinster was an occupation. Women who spun wool or flax were vital to the medieval economy. They produced linen, cloth, ropes, all the things that held life together, quite literally. Many were unmarried because spinning gave them a way to live without husbands. They earned their keep, managed their time, and answered to no one but themselves. Independence, paid by the yard. But society doesn't like loopholes, especially when women find them. So, slowly, spinster stopped meaning a job and started meaning a failure. The word that once stood for skill now marked shame. By the late Middle Ages, if someone called you a spinster, they weren't praising your weaving, they were saying, "She couldn't catch a man." It's strange how language can become a weapon. You imagine the whispers spreading through a market. "Oh, that's Anne the spinster, such a pity. Never mind that Anne could make better cloth than anyone in town. Never mind that her work fed her family." The label stuck like burrs on wool. Inside the convent, you hear the same tone. Though cloaked in piety, the nuns don't say spinster, they say sister. But the power dynamic isn't so different. Both words mean belonging to no man. And in both worlds, that comes at a cost. Still, as you sit in the scriptorium, watching ink bleed into parchment, you can't help but admire those outside women, the spinners, healers, midwives, who refused to vanish behind stone walls. They carved their place in a system that barely allowed them one. Every turn of their spindle was a quiet act of defiance. A soft hum of, "I can survive without you." You wonder if the abbess ever spun wool before her vows. Her hands move deftly as she repairs a torn robe. And you catch her humming, not a hymn, but a folk tune, something older than scripture. You realize, with a flicker of warmth, that rebellion sometimes hides in the smallest gestures. Even the church couldn't fully erase that. It tried, through sermons, confessions, penance, but women's labor was too necessary to condemn entirely. So they compromised. The world would tolerate unmarried women, as long as they were poor, humble, and silent. If you were rich and unmarried, though, you were a scandal waiting to happen. A curious thought drifts through your mind. The men who mocked spinsters were probably wearing their cloth. Every knight's tunic, every priest's robe, every merchant's sail, spun by hands they would never honor. History, you realize, is full of that kind of irony. Sometimes, you help in the abbey's weaving room, where older sisters work by candlelight. Their fingers are quick, their chatter soft. One night, you hear a story about a woman from a nearby town who refused marriage, bought her own spinning wheel, and started selling her cloth to merchants directly. They said she's cursed. One nun whispers, "Her thread never breaks, no matter how tight you pull it." You smile. Maybe that's what defiance looks like, strong fiber. The church's rules and society's scorn were supposed to keep women in line. But words like spinster couldn't completely erase the truth. Independence had its own quiet dignity. You picture those women, faces lined from work, backs straight with pride, humming to the rhythm of their wheels while the world gossiped. Scholars today still debate whether spinsters were truly marginalized or if they found a hidden strength in solitude. Some records suggest they formed small networks, sharing resources, protecting each other, creating a parallel economy of women helping women. Others say their lives were lonely, filled with suspicion and poverty. As always, history leaves the truth somewhere in between. You think about your own spinning, not of wool, but of stories. Every night, before sleep, you twist your memories into something durable. Each thought, each refusal, becomes a thread, and maybe, centuries from now, someone will hold that thread and feel its strength. Outside, rain begins to fall. The sound against the stone walls is soft and steady. Like a spindle turning, you close your eyes and imagine the spinning women in their cottages, the nuns in their cloisters, the defiant daughters hiding under the word spinster like armor. They are all part of the same tapestry, one woven from stubbornness, silence, and survival. You've heard the whispers for weeks now, the murmurs in the corridors, the subtle shifting of glances. She's not meant for marriage, one nun said. Her family sent her here to cool her spirit. You know what that means. You weren't the only one who was sent away for her own good. There are others, women hidden behind the same polite lie. In every convent across the medieval world, countless women found themselves here not out of faith, but out of convenience. Families with too many daughters, too little money, or too much pride. And so, the abbey became a warehouse of unwanted women, safe, sanctified, and silent. You watch as a new girl arrives one cold morning. She's young, maybe 16, trembling under a wool cloak too thin for the weather. Her father leaves without looking back, his boots clattering against the stones like punctuation marks on a sentence she didn't write. The Mother Superior smiles and welcomes her into a life of peace. You recognize that smile. It hides 1,000 secrets. Life in a convent wasn't always cruel, but it was rarely kind. Days began before dawn, with bells that sliced through dreams. You prayed, worked, ate, prayed again, then slept, if your conscience and your cot allowed it. The rhythm was meant to purify you, but sometimes it just scrubbed the self away. In the scriptorium, you learn the names of saints who gave up everything for faith. But you also hear rumors, stories passed quietly among the sisters after evening prayers. Some of those holy women didn't choose holiness. They chose survival. It's a subtle difference, but an important one. Once, you ask an older nun why she joined. Her eyes flicker to the window before she answers. I didn't join, she says. I stayed. Her words echo in your mind for days. You start to notice the small rebellions, hidden smiles, secret songs, fleeting glances toward the gate. The women here find their ways to exist between the lines of obedience. One keeps a stray cat in her room, feeding it bits of bread. Another sneaks wildflowers into the chapel, pretending they're for decoration. Tiny acts, but they matter. They're reminders that the soul can stretch even in a cage. The church saw itself as a mother, protecting women from sin. from desire, from the chaos of the world. But protection can look an awful lot like imprisonment when the door only locks from the outside. Sometimes, when the abbess isn't watching, you wander into the garden. It's small but alive, filled with the hum of bees and the soft rustle of leaves. There, you meet Sister Agnes, who tends to the herbs. She tells you which plants heal burns, which ease pain, which can make a person sleep so deeply they never wake. She says it with a smile, but you can't tell if it's a joke. Medieval humor had sharp edges. Agnes is different. She doesn't whisper like the others, she speaks plainly. One evening, while you both prune mint, she says, "You think you're trapped because you refused marriage. But out there, they're trapped too, just differently." You glance up, confused. She shrugs. "At least here, no man owns your body. That's worth something." You think about that all night. Maybe she's right, maybe in a twisted way. This cloistered life offers a strange kind of safety. No husband's hand, no childbirth dangers, no endless pregnancies, just the slow burn of monotony. It's not freedom, but it's not death either. It's a gray zone, survivable. Still, you can't shake the feeling that something's missing. You dream of open roads, of spinning wheels, of laughter not whispered behind stone. You imagine the world beyond, bustling markets, noisy children, colors brighter than these muted walls. You promise yourself that if you ever leave, you'll remember every sound you missed. Historians still debate whether these convents were prisons or sanctuaries. Some records describe joy, purpose, and even education. Others reveal letters of desperation, women begging their families to take them back. The truth, as always, depends on who's telling the story. One night, during Compline, as the last candle burns low, you find yourself whispering a prayer of your own. Not to leave, you know better than to ask for miracles, but to be remembered. You don't want to vanish quietly into history, reduced to a single word, none. Outside, a soft rain begins to fall, pattering against the windows like distant applause. You close your eyes and listen. Each drop feels like a heartbeat from another world, the one you used to know. And for just a moment, you smile. Maybe peace isn't about where you are, but what you refuse to let go of. As you drift towards sleep, the abbey hums around you, the prayers, the wind, the faint rustle of robes in the corridor. Somewhere, another woman is whispering her own rebellion. Together, you form a chorus the world will never hear, but time will remember. The convent bells have become part of your heartbeat now, predictable, relentless. But one morning, between the bells and the birds, you hear something new, laughter. Not the gentle, holy kind, real laughter, sharp, human, alive. It comes from the guest courtyard, where a small group of townsfolk have gathered. Among them stands a woman dressed in colors too bright for a place so gray. She's smiling at a man, leaning closer than modesty allows. And you can feel every nun's eyes sharpen. Love, or something pretending to be it, has crossed the convent threshold. And that, in this world, is dangerous. Because for women in the Middle Ages, love wasn't simply an emotion. It was a transaction, a contract, a potential crime, especially if you weren't supposed to have it. Later that day, you overhear the sisters gossiping while scrubbing the floors. The woman outside isn't married, She's a merchant's daughter who refused a match and came here seeking spiritual counsel. You can almost hear the unspoken part. Or maybe she just wanted to breathe. But she's not the first. The archives of history, if you know where to look, are full of women like her. Women who loved without permission, who hid affection like contraband, who wrote letters in invisible ink, or smuggled glances through lattice windows. You'd think love would be celebrated in a world obsessed with marriage. But the truth? The church feared love that didn't serve its system. Passion was unpredictable, marriage was control. That's why they made rules. Endless rules. Who could marry? Who couldn't? When you could touch? How you should repent? They even categorized kisses: fraternal, betrothal, sinful. Imagine having your affection graded like a confession. Still, love doesn't care about canon law. It seeps through cracks in walls, slips between vows, blooms in the least convenient corners. You meet her, the merchant's daughter, one afternoon while tending the herb garden. She's not as radiant up close, her eyes are tired. Her hands ink-stained from writing. She tells you she came here to escape an arranged marriage to a man 3 times her age. He owns half the market, she says, and thinks he owns me, too. You nod. You understand more than you can say. At first, she visits the abbey daily, pretending piety, then less often, because the abbess grows suspicious. Finally, she stops coming altogether. A week later, a messenger arrives, grim-faced, silent. The sisters whisper that she's been found in sin. The man she loved was married. She's been sent away to a house of repentance. You don't ask what happens there. You already know. Medieval repentance wasn't about forgiveness, it was about fear. Women caught in love affairs were punished in ways that blurred the line between correction and cruelty. Shaved heads, public penance, exile, and always the same moral: obedience above desire. Yet even among nuns, temptation found a way. The chronicles, carefully censored, of course, mention scandals in convents. Hidden letters, secret meetings, a stolen touch during evening prayer. Some historians insist these are exaggerated tales meant to discredit women's sanctity. Others quietly admit, where there are hearts, there will be longing. You've seen it yourself. A glance held too long. A hymn sung too tenderly. Love, in any form, is treason here, and treason has consequences. One night, during Vespers, the abbess announces that 2 sisters have been transferred to another house. No explanation, just silence, but the way the other nuns bow their heads tells you everything. You lie awake that night, tracing the cracks in the ceiling with your eyes. You think about all the ways women have been punished for wanting freedom, peace, or something as simple as warmth. You realize that in this age, love is the most dangerous kind of courage. And maybe that's why some still risk it. A faint breeze slips through the window, carrying the smell of night flowers and candle wax. You let it wash over you, imagining the world beyond these walls, the marketplaces, the laughter, the stolen kisses behind chapel doors. Somewhere out there, women are still refusing, still choosing the uncertain over the unbearable. They may be punished, shamed, forgotten, but they exist. And as long as they exist, the story continues. The bells ring again, soft this time, almost sympathetic. You close your eyes and whisper. Not a prayer, but a quiet wish. May no one ever have to apologize for love. Sleep creeps in like a confession. The candles flicker out. The morning sun spills through narrow windows, slicing the air into golden bars. It feels warmer today, but that warmth hides something colder: calculation. The abbess has been called away to meet a visiting bishop, and whispers ripple through the convent like wind through dry reeds. You've learned that whenever men from outside come to visit, the conversations aren't about faith. They're about money. Dowries, debts, inheritances, the real holy trinity of medieval marriage. In this age, love is a luxury, but marriage? That's business. Every union means property changing hands, alliances forming, land expanding, and for women, those transactions come with a price tag: the dowry. The payment your family must offer to make you worth marrying. You think of your own dowry, or what would have been yours. A few acres, a silver cup, a cow, maybe. Not enough to buy affection, but enough to buy a husband's patience. Without it, you're a bad investment. A marriage without a dowry is like a contract without ink, technically possible, but no one respectable would sign it. In the convent's guest hall, the bishop's voice rises and falls in the next room. You can't hear the words, but you can hear the rhythm, haggling. Even the church profits from this system. Families pay dowries to send their daughters into holy service, and abbeys use the money to buy land or books or rebuild roofs. Salvation, apparently, comes with a receipt. You can't help but smile at the irony. The men preaching humility are the same ones balancing ledgers in God's name. Later, Sister Agnes tells you a story about a widow who refused to remarry and tried to keep her late husband's property. They accused her of greed. Agnes says, trimming mint leaves. Then her brother took her land for her protection. You know that story too well. In medieval law, unmarried women couldn't own property without a male guardian. Freedom was a legal impossibility. Everything, the house you lived in, the food you ate, even the bed you slept on, was technically someone else's. You walk through the abbey's cloister, tracing the stone walls with your fingers. You wonder how many of these women came here not out of devotion, but because the math didn't work. No dowry, no husband, no options. The convent became their final ledger entry. Historians still debate how dowries evolved, whether they were protection or punishment. Some argue they gave women leverage. Others say they chained them to families' ambitions. The truth, as always, depends on who held the quill. Imagine being a young woman, watching your parents negotiate your future over bread and wine. She's clever, they'd say, and her hands are steady, but her dowry's small. A pause, a shrug, a verdict. It's easy now, centuries later, to laugh at how transactional it all seems. But back then, everything was transactional. A cow for a bride, a field for a favor, a child for peace between neighbors. And yet, some women turned the game around. A few learned to use dowries like bargaining chips. A noblewoman with a large dowry could choose between suitors, delay marriage, or demand terms others couldn't. One even wrote her own contract, specifying that her husband couldn't sell her jewelry without her consent. You can almost hear her voice across time. You may marry me, but you won't own me. Of course, most weren't so lucky. A girl without a dowry was like a candle without a wick, decorative, but useless in a world that demanded utility. Some became servants, some joined convents, others disappeared into the quiet corners of history. You sit by your narrow window, watching a bee hover near the herbs below. Even bees, you think, get to choose where they land. The bishop leaves before dusk. His carriage rattles away, leaving the abbey in uneasy silence. The abbess looks pleased. You suspect a new donation has been promised. Perhaps another young woman, joining the faith. You whisper to yourself, joining or being sold? The words sound bitter, even to your own ears. Still, you can't help but admire the women who learned to survive within this cruel arithmetic. They spun, they taught, they healed, they prayed, they became invisible, but indispensable. That's the paradox of history. Those who had the least power often held the whole system together. As the last light fades, you return to your cell. You think of all the coins and contracts, all the fathers and priests and lords who decided what a woman's worth should be. You smile faintly, not with joy, but with recognition. The world still runs on bargains, doesn't it? Only the currency has changed. You breathe slowly, feeling the cool air settle in your lungs. The bells ring again, signaling Compline. Another day done. Another small defiance survived. You hear the news at breakfast, whispered between mouthfuls of bread and silence. A local widow has refused to remarry. The nuns say it with a mix of awe and pity, as if the woman has committed a brave but doomed kind of sin. You lean in, listening. Her name is Lady Beatrice, and her husband, a minor lord, died last winter. Now the council insists she find new protection. That word again, protection. It always sounds noble until you realize it means ownership. Widowhood was supposed to be one of the few states in which a woman could breathe freely. After all, a widow had already fulfilled her duty. She'd married, obeyed, produced heirs. She'd done her part. But if she tried to enjoy that freedom too much, the world got nervous. A single woman with money, land, and no husband? That wasn't liberation. That was chaos. You picture Lady Beatrice sitting at her table, ink-stained fingers writing to the council. Her letter might begin politely. I thank you for your concern, but I require no husband. But beneath the courtesy, there's defiance. She's not just saying no to a man. She's saying no to the entire idea that she must belong to anyone again. And for that, she's dangerous. In many places, widows like her were forced to remarry to keep their property under supervision. Others were placed under male guardians, sons, brothers, even distant cousins. The logic was always the same: a woman alone cannot manage herself. Historians still argue about whether this belief was rooted in fear or convenience. Probably both. You stir your thin soup and imagine her fate. Maybe she'll hold out for a few months, maybe a year, but eventually, someone will come with papers, legal words dressed as kindness, and she'll be cornered. If she yields, she's safe but silent. If she refuses, she risks everything. Sister Agnes notices your faraway look. You're thinking about her, she says. You nod. Ah, the widows. She sighs. They're the ones who learned too late that freedom isn't a gift, it's a fight. She tells you a story of another widow, decades ago, who refused to marry again after her husband's death. The local priest accused her of pride and witchcraft, a convenient combination. They said she bewitched men into disinterest. You can't help but smile. If only that spell were real. You spend the afternoon in the garden, pruning herbs, your mind spinning like a wheel. It's strange, even here. Behind walls, you can feel how the world fears women who don't depend on men. The fear crosses every gate, every prayer, every border. But Lady Beatrice's name keeps echoing. In some ways, she's freer than you'll ever be. She owns her home, her voice, her time. She's living what so many dream of. Yet the very freedom that should make her safe is what makes her vulnerable. The medieval church liked widows when they were pious and quiet, generous donors. Obedient patrons. But a widow who ran her own estate, traded in markets, or refused suitors, she became a problem. Chronicles describe such women as unruly, decadent, even masculine. Heaven forbid a woman manage her own life without a beard to legitimize her. Still, some of these widows thrived. They hired stewards, built businesses, funded churches, and educated their daughters. In rare cases, they even wrote their own wills, carefully ensuring that their land went to women, not to the husbands of their daughters. That was real rebellion, not noise, but ink. You wonder what Lady Beatrice will do next. Maybe she'll find allies, a sympathetic priest, a clever notary, a friend with courage, or maybe she'll vanish into rumor. Her story rewritten to fit the comfort of those who feared her. History is full of women whose strength was turned into myth. As night falls, the candles flicker in your cell. You imagine Lady Beatrice staring at her own candle, miles away, thinking the same thoughts. Two women, separated by walls and distance, bound by the same question: how much freedom is worth the price? Outside, the wind howls through the trees. It sounds almost like laughter, low, knowing, unafraid. You close your eyes and picture Beatrice walking through her empty hall. Head high, footsteps echoing on stone. For now, she's still her own mistress. Tomorrow, no one knows. But tonight, she's free. And that, in this world, is enough to make her legendary. The story of Lady Beatrice lingers in your thoughts long after the evening bell. You keep seeing her walking through her manor halls, skirts brushing the flagstones, servants uncertain whether to bow or whisper. Her late husband's portrait still hangs above the hearth like a silent accusation. You shouldn't be here alone. And that's really the problem, isn't it? In this world, land and loyalty go together. And women without husbands confuse the accounting. When Beatrice's husband died, his property technically became hers, but only in trust. As the lawmen liked to say, until a proper male relative could administer it. They never called it theft, they called it stewardship. You can almost imagine the meeting. 3 cousins at a long table. Parchment and seals ready, pretending concern. She's not safe managing estates. One says, she needs protection. Another adds, that favorite medieval euphemism for possession. Within weeks, her holdings are reassigned. She keeps her house, but not the right to sell a field, hire laborers, or even collect rent. Freedom, reduced to furniture. You stir the candle on your desk, watching the wax pool and harden. That's how laws worked back then, warm when convenient, solid when you needed to trap someone. Medieval property codes were built like a spider's web, invisible until you were caught. A single woman couldn't inherit without a male guardian. If she tried to buy land, the contract was invalid unless a man co-signed. If she died, her estate didn't pass to her daughters but reverted to her husband's family. You can almost hear the clerks laughing as they copied those rules, convinced they were preserving order. Historians still argue about whether this was deliberate oppression or just a reflection of the times. Either way, the result was the same. Every woman's life was written in someone else's handwriting. Here in the Abbey, you see the same logic in smaller ways. The garden you tend isn't yours, even though your hands keep it alive. The books you copy belong to the church. Even the prayers you whisper are considered communal property, shared, supervised, sanctified. You smile wryly. Apparently, even faith needs a landlord. Sister Agnes once told you, "A woman's worth is like water. It always takes the shape of the vessel it's poured into." You didn't understand then, now you do. Beatrice's vessel is her estate, yours is these walls. Different shapes, same confinement. Still, not every woman accepted the script. In dusty records across Europe, you find traces of lawsuits, widows taking brothers-in-law to court, demanding back land or wages. One even argued that her dowry had been a loan, not a gift. And won. It's a small victory. But in that world, small victories echoed loudly. You like to imagine the courtroom, men in robes, eyebrows raised, and a single widow standing straight, her voice calm but steady. "Show me where in God's law it says I must surrender what I built." No thunderbolt fell. No angel intervened. Just ink, logic, and stubbornness. Sometimes that was enough. Back in your cell, you write her name in the margins of a scrap of parchment, Beatrice. The ink bleeds slightly, forming tiny rivers. You whisper to yourself, "She kept her name," and that, you think, might be the greatest inheritance of all. Outside, the night hums with crickets. You think about how property was never really about soil or silver, it was about control. And women who couldn't be controlled became myths, monsters, or martyrs, depending on who wrote the chronicle. You blow out your candle, letting the smoke twist upward. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Beatrice still breathes, still refuses. Maybe her lands are gone, but her story remains. A seed caught in the wind, waiting to take root somewhere freer. You close your eyes. The world may have stolen her acres, but not her defiance. And in the quiet dark, that feels like victory. The next morning dawns pale and heavy, like parchment before ink. The abbess's voice echoes through the corridors. "Prepare for visitors." The bishop's clerks are arriving. You feel the nuns stiffen around you, adjusting veils, straightening habits. Visitors mean inspection, and inspection means judgment, especially for women who live without men. But the clerks aren't here for the abbey. They're here to investigate something stranger. A woman in the next province who's been declared a living saint. Her name is Elena of Brian. She never married, never took vows, yet lived alone, fasting and praying in a cottage on the edge of the woods. People say miracles happened around her. Cattle healed, children spoke, bread multiplied. And now, the church wants to know if she's a saint or a heretic. That's the thing about medieval faith. Sainthood and sin looked almost identical. You could pray too much, fast too long, love God too directly. Piety, when practiced by men, was called holiness. When practiced by women, it was often called madness. You hear one clerk murmur, "She refused all suitors, said her only bridegroom was Christ." The abbess nods approvingly, though her eyes flicker with unease. That line, "Bride of Christ," had been the Church's perfect solution to women who didn't want husbands. Marry God, and everyone stays comfortable. It sounds romantic, in a morbid sort of way. But it wasn't always voluntary. Many women took those vows under pressure. Their holy marriage, a convenient disguise for coercion. You imagine Elena, alone in her cottage, whispering prayers into the dark. Did she truly feel chosen, or simply cornered? Still, her legend grows. Pilgrims visit her, leaving coins and bread. The local priest tries to control the flow of donations. But Elena distributes them to the poor. That's where the trouble starts. Independence and charity, a dangerous combination. The Church doesn't like saints it can't manage. Sister Agnes tells you, the line between saint and witch is drawn by whoever holds the quill. She's right, you've seen it before. Women who heal are accused of sorcery. Women who preach are called heretics. Women who stay silent are praised, until silence becomes inconvenient. By sunset, the clerks have left, muttering about reports and authorization. The abbess looks thoughtful, almost wistful. There's holiness in obedience, she says. You want to ask if there's holiness in choice. But you bite your tongue. Some questions still get you burned. Later, alone in the chapel, you light a single candle and stare into the flame. You think of Elena, her bare feet in the dirt, her hair tangled by wind, her prayers carried into the trees. Maybe she wasn't seeking sainthood at all. Maybe she just wanted peace. And the world couldn't imagine a woman who desired nothing but her own quiet. Historians, centuries later, will debate women like her. Some will call them mystics, others visionaries, others delusional. The truth is simpler. They were women who didn't fit into the boxes built for them. So the Church built new ones and labeled them divine. You smile softly. Maybe being called a saint was the only way to survive being called a sinner. As the candle burns low, you remember stories of other women, Hildegard of Bingen, Clare of Assisi, Julian of Norwich, all unmarried, all brilliant, all walking that narrow path between reverence and rebellion. Their words still survive, glowing in manuscripts copied by patient hands. They weren't meant to be revolutionary. Yet somehow, they were. You wonder what future eyes will think when they read about women like you, or Lady Beatrice. Or Elena. Will they call you oppressed, brave, or something in between? Will they understand that survival itself was resistance? The candle guttered, and the smoke curled upward like a ghost of thought. Somewhere outside, the bells of the nearby town toll faintly. You whisper, half in prayer, half in hope. May the world learn to bless women without cages. The flame dies, but its warmth lingers on your skin. You close your eyes, hearing the echo of unseen voices, women across centuries, chanting softly, their words blending into one long, endless psalm of defiance and grace. Night falls like a veil, soft, cool, deceptive. The air carries the faint smell of smoke and damp earth. Somewhere in the valley below the abbey, torches flicker, And you hear murmurs rising with the wind. It's not a festival. It's a hunt. You know the pattern now. First come the whispers, then the prayers, then the flames. This time, the target isn't a sinner or a heretic. It's a woman who lived alone. Her name was Marta. No husband, no children, no dowry. Just a cottage on the edge of town and a skill with herbs. The people called her wise woman when they needed her. Witch when they didn't. That word, witch, has grown sharper lately. You can feel it cutting through villages, turning neighbor against neighbor. It's become the church's favorite catch-all for any woman who doesn't fit the script. If you're poor and no medicine, you're suspicious. If you're rich and refuse marriage, you're dangerous. If you're simply alone, you're unnatural. You close your eyes and picture Marta walking home at dusk. Her basket full of mint, sage, and rue. She stops to help a sick child, leaves a salve, and moves on. The next week, the child dies, not because of her, but because disease doesn't care about good intentions. Still, grief needs a villain, and a woman who refuses to belong makes the perfect one. Within days, the gossip begins. She spoke to the devil. Someone says, her cat never blinks. Another adds, stories spread faster than smoke, each one darker, more absurd. Eventually, no one remembers where the first rumor started, only that it must be true. Because everyone repeats it. You think of how many times history has run this script. It never starts with fire, it starts with fear. The church insists witch hunts are about saving souls. The town says it's about protecting children. But deep down, everyone knows it's about control. A world built on obedience can't stand a woman who listens to herself. Even inside the abbey, you feel the tension. Some nuns mutter about witches in the hills. The abbess frowns, saying, better safe than sorry. You wonder what safe really means in a world where safety requires a scapegoat. That night, you dream of Marta. She stands in a field, her hair loose, her hands glowing faintly with moonlight. She's not afraid. She looks directly at you and says, they call it witchcraft because they can't call it wisdom. Then the dream dissolves into smoke. Historians centuries later will write books about this madness, about how superstition, politics, and misogyny braided together into one long rope of terror. But you, living it, know the truth feels much simpler. They fear what they can't control. And yet, even within the horror, small acts of defiance survive. In some villages, women hide each other. Midwives share secret signs, a way to recognize friends. To warn of danger, some priests quietly protect the accused, claiming divine visions to distract the mob. Humanity flickers in the cracks, stubborn and bright. The worst part is how ordinary it all feels. You hear people in town speaking of the trials as if they're chores: fetch water, mend clothes, burn a witch. You wonder if the world has simply forgotten how to tell mercy from order. One afternoon, a merchant passes near the abbey, bringing news. They burned her, he says, eyes down. Said her ashes flew up like birds. You imagine it, the sparks lifting into the twilight, rising higher than the church steeple. Freedom in its final form. The sisters cross themselves. You just stand there, silent, heart heavy but unbroken. Somewhere deep inside, you know Marta didn't vanish. She just changed shape, became a story, a warning. a whisper that refuses to die. Because every time a woman says no, somewhere, the wind still carries her name. That night, you sit by your candle, the flame trembling but steady. You whisper softly, "They feared your fire, Marta, because they never learned how to make their own." Outside, the rain begins, soft, cleansing, endless. You imagine it falling on ashes, turning them to soil, and from that soil, wild herbs will grow again. You breathe in, and the scent of sage and smoke seems to linger, timeless. By dawn, the rain has stopped, leaving the earth slick and silver. Mist curls between the trees like breath from a sleeping giant. You pull your cloak tighter as you walk the narrow path that leads from the abbey toward the village. You've been sent to gather herbs for the infirmary, mint for fever, yarrow for cuts, chamomile for sleepless nights. It feels strange, stepping beyond the gates after so long. The world smells of wet soil and smoke, life and death braided together. You find yourself thinking about Marta again, about how her story didn't end with fire, it scattered into the soil. The people here still whisper her name, quietly, almost reverently. "She used to heal," an old woman says as you pass. "She knew what the doctors didn't." There's grief in her tone, but also pride. The church may have erased her body, but not her memory. In small villages like this, survival often depended on women like Marta. They were the ones who birthed babies, cured fevers, stitched wounds. Most couldn't read or write, but they knew the language of leaves and roots. The irony? The same knowledge that saved lives was what condemned them. You stop at a stream and kneel to wash your hands. The water is cold, clear, indifferent, as if the earth itself has no interest in the quarrels of men and priests. You think about how absurd it is that kindness could be mistaken for sorcery, that healing could be called heresy. Further down the road, you meet a woman with a basket full of herbs. She greets you warmly. Her name is Elspeth, and she reminds you of Marta, same sharp eyes, same steady hands. She tells you she's been helping the local midwife. The priests don't like it, she says, smiling faintly. They say the pain of childbirth is Eve's punishment. I say Eve's had enough. You almost laugh. It's the first joke you've heard in days. But there's danger in her words. And she knows it. You shouldn't say that aloud. You warn softly. She shrugs. If truth burns, let it burn. In her cottage, the air smells of rosemary and smoke. Dried flowers hang from the rafters like silent witnesses. You sit while she mixes a paste for a sick child, her hands moving with the grace of someone who's done this 1,000 times. They call us witches, she says, but when their wives bleed or their sons cough, who do they come to first? You can't argue with that. Even the abbess sends for village healers when the sisters fall ill. The church condemns with one hand and borrows with the other. It's a familiar rhythm, hypocrisy disguised as holiness. Historians will later write that witch hunts were driven by fear, ignorance, and famine, but that's only part of it. Power always hides behind fear. By labeling these women evil, the authorities stripped them of authority. If a woman could heal without a priest's blessing, what else might she do without permission? As you listen to Elspeth hum while she grinds herbs, you realize something. These women weren't just healers. They were scientists, therapists, community leaders, centuries before such words existed. They worked with observation, intuition, and care, and though history burned many of their names, their legacy lingers every time someone reaches for medicine, or comfort, or hope. When you leave, Elspeth gives you a bundle of time wrapped in linen. For protection, she says, but not from demons, from despair. You walk back toward the abbey, the scent of time clinging to your fingers. The sun pierces through the clouds, scattering light across the wet fields. You feel, for the first time in a long time, that not all stories end in ashes. Some take root instead. At the gate, Sister Agnes greets you. She sniffs the herbs, raises an eyebrow. That woman, she murmurs, she's brave or foolish. You smile. Sometimes it's the same thing. That night, as the sisters sleep, you crush a bit of time between your fingers. The fragrance fills your cell, sharp, alive, defiant. You whisper to the dark, may the healers never vanish. May the wise women always return. The scent lingers long after your candle dies. A promise that knowledge, once planted, never really fades. The storm passes, and with it comes gossip carried by traveling merchants, stories of women who don't live in huts or abbeys, but in palaces, queens, duchesses, noble ladies who somehow slip through the same nets that caught so many others. It's almost comforting to think that power might protect them, that gold and lineage could soften the rules. But of course, in this world, even crowns are cages. You hear of one in particular, Princess Eleanor of Aquitaine. Her story travels like a rumor wrapped in silk, the woman who refused to stay silent, who dared to ride into battle beside her husband, who later demanded a divorce from a king. Divorce. In the 12th century, you can practically hear the collective gasp of Europe echoing through time. And yet, Eleanor survived. She ruled lands, raised armies, educated children who would become kings. Historians love to call her exceptional, as if that makes her less threatening. But you can tell, her strength wasn't an exception. It was just the version of womanhood the world tried hardest to bury. Royal women like her lived under the same laws, the same church, but they wielded visibility as armor. A noble woman could claim piety while manipulating alliances, sponsor abbeys while directing policy, smile sweetly while shaping dynasties. They walked a tightrope between reverence and ruin. Still, not all escaped unscathed. Take Jeanne de Clisson, the Breton widow who turned pirate after her husband's execution. The chronicles call her the Lioness of Brittany. After King Philip of France had her husband killed on suspicion of treason, Jeanne sold her estate, bought 3 warships, painted them black, and sailed the coast hunting French vessels. A woman who refused to marry, and refused to kneel. You can't help but grin at that image. A widow in armor. Wind tearing through her hair. The sea her only master. Some would call it madness. Others might call it freedom. The church, predictably, called it sin. Women in power were dangerous because they reminded everyone that obedience wasn't natural, it was trained. And if one woman could unlearn it, others might too. Back in the abbey, Sister Agnes chuckles when she hears the tales. Royal women, she says, play the same game as peasants, they just have better shoes. She's not wrong. Freedom still costs the same, no matter how much gold you wear. You think of Eleanor, Jean, and others whose names don't survive. Not every noblewoman had ships or armies. Some simply delayed marriage, or refused to remarry, or managed estates in secret through clever letters. Power disguised as politeness. Their defiance was quieter, but no less real. You once copied a charter that began with the words, "I, Lady Isabel, in the absence of my lord, do hereby command," the scribe beside you whispered. She must have been bold. You remember thinking, no, she must have been tired. Tired of waiting for permission. Historians still debate how much freedom these women really had. Some call them pawns in dynastic games. Others pioneers of autonomy. You suspect the truth is both. They played within the rules long enough to learn how to bend them. Outside, the wind rises, rattling the shutters. You imagine the royal courts, the smell of wax and perfume. The sound of silk against stone. Beneath all that glamour, the same tension hums. Will she obey? Or won't she? You smile softly to yourself. Perhaps rebellion doesn't always roar. Sometimes it curtsies. And yet, you can feel the limits closing in again. Even the boldest queens had to disguise ambition behind duty. Intelligence behind devotion. The language of survival was translation, saying, "I serve," while quietly planning. Saying, "Yes, my lord," while meaning, "Not forever." As the night deepens, you return to your narrow bed. The candle trembles beside you. Its flame bending but never breaking. It reminds you of those women, bending history around themselves. Shaping the world in ways that chroniclers would later edit out. You whisper into the quiet. Eleanor, Jean, Isabel, the world tried to bury you. But the soil remembers. And for a moment, the darkness feels less like confinement, and more like inheritance. The abbey looks calm from a distance, white walls, trimmed hedges, candles glowing through narrow windows. But inside, you've learned that peace can be a disguise. The silence isn't serenity, it's control. You hear it in the shuffle of sandals on stone, in the soft scrape of bowls during supper. 1,000 unspoken rules hang in the air, as heavy as incense. The Mother Superior insists this is the house of God. But lately, it feels more like a house of correction. You first notice the change after a new sister arrives, young, pale, too thin for her robes. Her name is Clara. She doesn't speak much, but her eyes dart everywhere, as if measuring escape routes. She was sent here for her own good. The abbess says, that familiar refrain. You don't ask what that means. You already know. Life in this cloister isn't like the stories sung by traveling monks. No gentle sisters tending gardens or painting icons in blissful solitude. It's discipline by design, days built to erase individuality, to make souls obedient and bodies still. The bell rings before dawn. You rise from the straw mattress. Half dreaming, half dreading. The corridors are cold, the air thick with candle smoke. The sisters line up for morning prayers. Eyes down, hands clasped, mouths whispering Latin words they barely understand. The abbess watches, her gaze sharp enough to cut through the dim light. You once asked Sister Agnes why the abbess keeps the rules so strict. She answered without looking up, because she fears what she used to be. You think about that often, how zeal is sometimes just guilt with better posture. Punishments here are quiet, almost elegant, no whips, no shouting, just silence, isolation, withheld bread, Longer hours in prayer. The goal isn't to hurt, but to hollow, to make you forget you ever had desires that didn't fit inside Scripture. One evening, you see Clara in the courtyard, kneeling on cold stones. Her hands tremble, her knees bleed. For humility, says the abbess when you look too long. You wonder whose humility she's teaching, Clara's, or her own. Later, you slip a piece of bread beneath Clara's door. She doesn't speak the next morning, but her eyes meet yours during prayers. A brief flicker of something human, gratitude, maybe, or survival. Historians, centuries later, will romanticize convent life, the chants, the manuscripts, the candlelight. They'll call it spiritual refuge. Some will even say the cloister gave women power, education, community, and in some places, that was true, but not here. Here, walls are armor for authority. The church builds cages and calls them sanctuaries. You've read the rule of Saint Benedict: obedience, chastity, poverty, humility, all noble in theory, but when you live them without choice, they stop feeling holy. They start feeling like confinement with hymns. Sometimes, late at night, you hear muffled sobs through the corridor. Not loud, not defiant, just the kind of sound that happens when someone forgets what freedom feels like. You've learned not to knock, not to comfort. Comfort draws attention, and attention draws punishment. The abbess walks through the halls like a shadow wearing silk, her face serene, her hands folded. She preaches mercy by day, metes out discipline by candlelight. You wonder if she even remembers the girl she once was, the one who must have been sent here long ago. Same as the rest of you. Still, not all is despair. In stolen moments, the sisters share jokes so quiet they barely count as laughter. A misplaced candle, a Latin mispronunciation, a mouse stealing bread during prayer. It's rebellion disguised as humor. Survival measured in whispers. You keep notes, tiny scraps of parchment hidden behind loose stones, not prayers, but memories. You write about Clara, about Marta, about Lady Beatrice and Eleanor. You write their names so they don't vanish. The church may burn bodies, but it can't burn words that haven't been found yet. Sometimes you wonder if this is your real calling, not to serve, but to witness, to keep record of what power once forgotten. Tonight, the abbey feels especially still. The candles burn low, the air hums with fatigue. You press your ear to the stone and hear something faint, footsteps. Maybe, or the echo of prayers trapped between centuries. You can't tell, but it sounds like women whispering to each other through time. You close your eyes, feeling the stone's coolness against your cheek. We were here. You whisper back, we're still here. And the silence that follows feels almost like a reply. Days blur into one another now, prayer, work, silence, and the faint echo of the world beyond the abbey walls. Yet, once in a while, a new story slips through those cracks like sunlight. You hear of women who escaped. Not quietly, not into the grave, not into sainthood, but into life. Their names rarely survive, but their words sometimes do. In letters hidden between book bindings. In confessions rewritten by cautious monks. In poems signed only with initials. Fragments of rebellion disguised as devotion. One letter, found centuries later in the margins of a psalter, begins simply, "To whoever finds this, know that I lived." The rest is cramped Latin. half prayer, half rage. The writer, an unnamed nun, tells of running from her convent with another sister, taking only bread and a single candle. She writes that they followed the river until it disappeared into fog. That line alone feels like scripture, until it disappeared into fog. You imagine her writing it, ink trembling, candle guttering, the courage it takes to run in a world that believes a woman's footsteps belong to someone else. Escape was rare, but not impossible. Some women bribed guards. Some disguised themselves as monks. Others found shelter in sympathetic households. Every escape story feels miraculous not because it defied physics, but because it defied belief, the belief that obedience was inevitable. You can still hear Sister Agnes's voice from weeks ago. The walls are only real if you forget the door. You didn't understand then. Now you think she meant that freedom starts in the mind, long before the feet move. There's a rumor in the abbey that one of the sisters disappeared years ago. The story shifts depending on who tells it. Some say she was taken by raiders. Others whisper she became a hermit in the hills. The abbess insists she died of fever. But there's no grave, no records, just an absence shaped like possibility. You copy another manuscript today. A sermon about humility. The words blur together until you start inserting your own between the lines, tiny rebellions no one will notice. Mercy lives beyond obedience. God is not a warden. Freedom is holy. 2. You press harder with each line, as if carving the truth into parchment. Historians will later debate these small acts, whether women in cloisters understood their rebellion, or if we simply project courage backward because we want to believe it existed. You think the answer is simple. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it scratches words into margins. One evening, you're assigned to the chapel alone. The air smells of wax and damp stone. You kneel, but instead of praying, you listen. The night outside hums with insects and the faint croak of frogs, a reminder that the world is still alive, still moving. For a moment, the idea of leaving doesn't feel impossible. But then the bells ring, sharp and cold. Reality folds around you again. You stand, whisper your expected amen, and blow out the candle. The room plunges into darkness, but your mind stays lit. Later, in your cell, you tuck a small scrap of parchment beneath the mattress. It reads, "If they find me gone, tell them I went toward the river." You smile. You may never run, but writing it feels like running in miniature. Outside, the moon spills silver across the courtyard. You imagine all the women before you who looked at that same light and thought the same thought. Maybe tonight. And maybe, somewhere in another century, another country, someone will. When you finally step outside the abbey gates, the world feels louder than you remember, carts creaking, dogs barking, vendors shouting over one another. Cities in the late Middle Ages are like living beasts, filthy, chaotic, alive in a way that no cloistered wall could ever be. And among this noise move the women who didn't marry, who didn't pray, who didn't vanish. They walk quickly, heads down but eyes sharp. No husband, no dowry, no protection, just wit and will. You see them in the markets first, widows selling bread, unmarried sisters weaving cloth, old spinsters running taverns with more authority than any priest. They've carved out a place for themselves not by permission, but by persistence. But make no mistake, The city doesn't welcome them. Laws are written against unregulated women. Guilds ban them from membership. Tax collectors charge them double for daring to live without a man's signature. Freedom has its own currency. And it's always expensive. You stop by a stall run by a woman named Magda. Her hands are rough from labor. Her smile too tired to hide the struggle. She sells candles and herbs, not holy ones, but practical ones, for light, for warmth, for survival. No husband? You ask quietly. She snorts. No master. You mean? Then she leans closer. Men pay more when they think I have one, so I keep an extra ring just for show. You laugh softly. Cleverness is currency here, too. Historians later call women like Magda economic outsiders. But they were really innovators. They created parallel economies, networks of widows, single women, and healers trading goods, labor, and protection. They watched each other's backs when the law turned its face. One night, you follow the glow of torches to a small courtyard where these women meet after dark. It isn't rebellion, not exactly. Just quiet strategy. They share news. Who's hiring? Who's harassing? Who's disappeared? Someone passes around bread. Someone else pours cheap ale. The laughter is hushed but real. Better to be poor and breathing, one says, than rich and buried under a husband. The others nod, and for a moment, the night feels almost warm. Still, danger always lingers. The city guard patrols for immoral gatherings. The church preaches against idle women who tempt men into sin simply by existing. Every freedom earned in daylight must be hidden again by dusk. And yet, in those hidden places, a new kind of power begins to form. Not the loud kind that crowns kings, the quiet kind that keeps people alive. You see it in the way these women share food, trade favors, teach each other to read market signs, or forge a widow's seal. They've built an invisible city within the city. You buy a candle from Magda before you leave. She wraps it in cloth, nodding toward the church tower rising in the distance. They build higher, she says, so they don't have to see us down here. You smile, but we see them. Walking back through the narrow streets, you realize how many invisible lives the chronicles will never mention. History prefers queens and saints, not candle sellers or cloth weavers. But maybe those women are the real architects of survival. They build worlds out of scraps, and somehow, that world still echoes. You stop at the edge of the square, the candle in your hand flickering against the wind. Above you, the bell tolls midnight. Below it, the market's last lights fade. Somewhere in those shadows, hundreds of women like Magda breathe, endure, and refuse to disappear. You whisper into the wind, "You're not forgotten." And maybe, just maybe, they whisper back. The bells in the market square toll again at dawn. And you can almost feel their purpose, not just to mark time, but to remind people who controls it. The world, after all, runs on rules. And lately, those rules have turned their gaze toward women like Magda, women who work, live, and think without permission. Freedom, it seems, has become a public threat. You hear it first from a priest preaching at the crossroads. His voice booms through the morning air. A woman without a husband is like a city without walls, open to sin. People nod, not because they believe him, but because it's easier than disagreeing in public. His words drip with fear dressed as faith. The Middle Ages loved order. Everything, god, king, noble, peasant, man, woman, had its place. Like pieces on a chessboard. When someone moved wrong, the whole game trembled, and an unmarried woman, living by her own rules, wasn't just a missing pawn, she was an extra queen. That was intolerable. So, they began to write laws. Town councils issued ordinances against wandering women. Taxes increased for independent females of suspicious conduct. Even clothing became regulated. Unmarried women couldn't wear certain colors or fabrics. Modesty wasn't a moral choice anymore, it was policy. And the church added its weight. 2. Sermons warned that women who resisted marriage tempted the devil. Artists painted allegories, pride as a naked woman with a mirror, lust as one with flowing hair. Freedom itself became a sin with long eyelashes. You see the consequences in small ways. Magda's stall gets moved to the market's edge, too close to the baker's apprentices. They say, another woman, who runs a small school for girls, is fined for operating without clerical supervision. It's not open persecution, not yet. Just pressure. The slow squeeze of fear disguised as virtue. You walk through the streets, past doorways where women whisper behind shutters. They know how quickly independence turns into accusation. You see it in their faces, the half-smile that hides exhaustion. The constant awareness that safety can vanish with a rumor. Still, some refuse to bow. In a tavern near the docks, you overhear two women, sailors' widows, arguing about rent. One laughs bitterly. If men ran the world better, she says, they wouldn't be so scared when we try. The other raises her mug. To fear, she says, may it keep them busy while we live. You can't help but grin. There's something beautiful about defiance that still makes room for humor. Historians will later argue about why governments turned against single women so fiercely in this era. Some say it was economic, too many men dying in wars, too many women inheriting land. Others blame the rise of moral panic, or the church's desire for social stability. But you suspect the truth is simpler. Power always invents an enemy when it feels insecure. And women who refuse control are perfect enemies, visible, tangible, human reminders that obedience isn't destiny. By evening, you return to the abbey's outskirts, where the stone walls meet the wild grass. The sunset stains the horizon blood red, as if the sky itself remembers every silenced voice. You sit by the old gate, the same one you once thought you'd never pass again. The world outside is harsher than the cloister. But it's real. The noise, the dirt, the danger, they're all proof of something the abbey never offered: choice. You pull Magda's candle from your bag and light it. Its flame flickers stubbornly against the wind. You whisper, they fear us because we remind them they're not gods. The wind catches the words and carries them away, maybe to the market. Maybe to some woman sitting alone in her cottage, wondering if she's the only one who feels like this. You hope she hears it. The bells toll again, heavy and hollow, echoing across the field, but this time, you don't flinch. You've learned their secret. They only sound like authority when you listen. You turn your back to the abbey, toward the darkening road, and keep walking. The road curves toward the town, and by the time you arrive, the square is already full of people. You think, for a hopeful moment, that it's a festival, the way the crowd buzzes. The smell of smoke and bread in the air. But then you see the platform, the rope, the faces watching. This isn't celebration, it's punishment. A woman stands there, head bowed, her hair shorn unevenly. She's draped in a coarse gray gown, hands bound loosely in front of her. A priest reads from a parchment, his voice booming over the murmurs. Found guilty of fornication, deceit, and moral corruption. You can't hear the rest over the beating of your own heart. You've heard stories like this before, women punished for what men are forgiven for. But seeing it feels different, realer, crueler. They say she was caught in an affair with a married man. Though the details shift with every whisper. Maybe she loved him, maybe she didn't. It doesn't matter. In this world, her body isn't her own. Her love isn't her right. Desire, when it comes from a woman, is always someone's property and always someone's fault. The punishment isn't death. Not today. It's humiliation. They call it penance, but it looks more like spectacle. A soldier steps forward and cuts the rope at her wrists. She's told to kneel, to confess, to wash her soul in the eyes of the community. The crowd jeers softly, not out of cruelty, but participation. This is theater, and everyone's been cast. You notice something strange, though. The woman doesn't cry. She doesn't plead. She looks straight ahead, her gaze calm, even bored. That calm unsettles them more than any tears could. A priest tries to meet her eyes and fails. You almost smile, even bound. She's freer than they are. When it's over, she's led away, not to prison, but to the edge of the town, where fallen women live. A half-village, half-prison of exiles. You hear someone say she'll be made to work in a laundry. That's how they redeem women here, by washing other people's sins. You follow at a distance as dusk falls. The road grows muddy, the air colder. The settlement isn't much, wooden shacks. A broken chapel, smoke curling from low fires. But there's something else, too. Laughter. Not cruel laughter, but tired, real, human. Inside one of the huts, you see women gathered around a pot of stew. They talk, argue, sing. One plays a flute made from reed. Their lives are stripped bare. Yet somehow, they've kept joy alive, the kind that refuses to die even when the world demands it. A woman calls out when she sees you at the door. "You're not from here," she says. "You look too clean." You shrug. "Not for long." That earns a laugh, and someone ladles soup into a bowl for you. They tell stories while they eat, not of saints or queens, but of survival. One says she fell in love with a baker's apprentice and got caught. Another refused a nobleman's advances and was accused of witchcraft. A third simply ran away from her husband. That was enough, she says. It's always enough. You realize these women, exiled and condemned, are the freest people you've met. They own nothing, but no one owns them either. They've lost their reputations, and in losing them, they've gained a strange kind of peace. Historians, centuries later, will sanitize this place in records, calling it a house of repentance. But sitting here, hearing the laughter echo through smoke and night, you know what it really is: a refuge built from ruin. When you leave, one of the women presses a small token into your hand, a bit of carved bone shaped like a heart. "To remember us," she says. "They'll forget, but don't you?" You nod, slipping it into your pocket. You won't forget, not the rope, Not the laughter. Not the way she looked at the priest and didn't blink. Back on the road, the moon rises slow and full. You hold the bone heart in your palm and whisper. They wanted to shame you. Instead, they showed us your strength. The wind stirs through the fields like applause. The next morning, the wind carries something different, not the scent of smoke or incense, but of ink and paper. In the years that follow, whispers begin to drift through abbeys, courts, and schools. Words written by women, for women, about women, quiet ideas spreading like wild seeds. At first, they're dismissed as curiosities, a few eccentric nuns translating Latin texts, a widow writing about morality, a noblewoman defending her sex in polite prose. Nothing dangerous, at least. Not yet. But words have power, and paper has patience. You hear of a French woman named Christine de Pizan. Her husband died young, leaving her with debts, children, and no protector. Instead of remarrying, she did something extraordinary. She wrote. She picked up a quill, sat by candlelight, and began to question everything she'd been taught. Her most daring work, the Book of the City of Ladies, imagines a walled city built by women. For women, a sanctuary where intellect and virtue mattered more than birth or obedience. In her vision, queens, scholars, saints, and commoners stand side by side. No one is punished for saying no. No one is owned. When you hear her story, it feels almost mythical. A woman writing herself into history instead of waiting to be written out. You copy a fragment of her words into your own notebook. No man can possibly have such superiority over women that he should dare to assert that they are all bad. You smile as you write it. The sentence feels like a spark, small, but bright enough to outlive the dark. Others follow her path. In Italy, Laura Sarita writes letters defending women's education. In England, Marjorie Kemp dictates a spiritual autobiography so shocking that priests debate whether she's holy or mad. Everywhere, one by one, voices rise, some elegant, some trembling, all saying the same forbidden thing: we are human. The Church, of course, frowns. Scholars scoff. Some men call these women unnatural, claiming that too much learning will disturb the humors of the female body. You can't help but laugh at that, as if wisdom were an illness. Still, the ink keeps flowing. You think about how strange it must have felt for the first woman to hold a quill not as a tool of obedience, but as a weapon of defense. The scratching of pen on parchment, like the sound of shackles loosening. One word at a time. Historians later call this the dawn of female humanism. But for the women living it, it wasn't philosophy, it was survival. Writing became the one form of escape no gate could block. One evening, you meet a traveling scholar who's read Christine's work. He tells you her critics call her too proud. You raise an eyebrow. They called Joan of Arc the same. You say. He chuckles nervously, unsure if you're joking. Back in your room, you imagine the city of ladies, its towers gleaming under moonlight, its streets filled with the laughter of women who refused to vanish. You picture Lady Beatrice walking its walls, Marta tending its gardens, Magda selling candles in its market, even Clara, even the nameless sisters who never escaped, would find a place there. You realize that this city isn't stone or mortar. It's memory. Every time one woman's story survives, the walls grow higher. Every time one refuses silence, the gates open wider. You dip your quill into ink and add a line beneath Christine's words. And so the city stands, though they tried to burn it. The candlelight flickers across the page, and you feel, for the first time, something close to peace, not the forced peace of obedience, but the earned peace of endurance. Outside, dawn begins to rise, faint and gold. You look toward the horizon and think, maybe the story is changing. Maybe it always was. The bells begin to toll, but this time, they sound less like command and more like echo, a rhythm fading into a new age. The world is changing. You can feel it in the air, lighter, quicker, as if history itself is taking a deep breath before stepping forward. The old rhythm of bells and decrees still echoes, but beneath it hums something new, thought. You walk through a small university courtyard. Somewhere in late 15th century Europe, students hurry past in robes, clutching books, debating loudly in Latin. For centuries, women's voices have been silenced in places like this. Yet tonight, one sits quietly under an archway, reading by candlelight, no veil, no guard, no husband, just a book in her own mind. Her name doesn't survive in most records, but it doesn't matter. She stands for all the women who finally slipped through the cracks of the medieval world into classrooms, workshops, print shops, and courts. The Renaissance will soon claim them as muses. Though most were never merely inspiration, they were participants. Printing presses begin to thrum in distant cities, spitting out pages faster than priests can censor them. Knowledge spreads like wildfire, and with it, doubt. Doubt in kings, doubt in popes, doubt in the eternal rule that told women they were born to obey. You find a pamphlet written by a scholar quoting Christine de Pizan. Another by a monk arguing that women's education uplifts the soul of mankind. Small sparks, but enough to light torches. Soon, girls will learn to read, nuns will publish treatises, and midwives will keep written records of their art instead of whispering it in secret. You can almost feel the medieval world trembling, the feudal towers cracking, the monasteries thinning, the church clutching its robes tighter as curiosity begins to replace fear. And through it all, the women who once hid in shadows start stepping into the light. Lady Beatrice's great-granddaughters inherit her stubbornness. Marta's name turns into folklore. The wise woman, now reborn as the healer every village needs. The abbess's walls still stand, but inside them, younger sisters are reading letters that say things like, "God gave us minds to use." The world isn't kind yet, but it's listening. You sit by the river, the same river you once dreamed of escaping toward. The water glints with the fading sun and you think about every woman whose story carried you here. The daughters locked away, the spinsters mocked, the healers burned, the widows defiant, the saints, the scribes, the dreamers, all of them threads in a tapestry that refused to unravel. Somewhere nearby, a bell rings, not the heavy toll of command, but the light, metallic chime of a new clock. Time itself has changed. You reach into your pocket and pull out the small carved heart the woman from the exile camp gave you. It's smooth now, worn by years of being carried. You set it on the stone beside you and whisper, "You were right, they forgot your names, but not your courage." The wind stirs. The candle you've lit flickers but does not go out. You breathe slowly, the way one does at the end of a long story. If someone asked what happened to women who refused to marry during the Middle Ages, you'd tell them this. They were punished, silenced, erased, but never truly defeated. They became saints and heretics, widows and writers, witches and healers, and every time one of them said, no, the world learned, very slowly, what freedom meant. Now, centuries later, their defiance lives quietly in every woman who chooses for herself, whether to love, to learn, to stay, or to walk away. The stars shimmer above the river like small open eyes. You close yours, hearing the echo of all those unheard voices turning into a lullaby. Rest now, they seem to say. We made it this far. The wind softens. The candle burns low. History exhales. End of script. Sweet dreams.